That's right, Jim. ExpressVPN, and I'm not sure if it was ExpressVPN or what source you used, but I got a little look at what in the early 80s would have been Jim Cornette, the bootlegger, the video trader, when I received a link, surprisingly, with a match that I guess we had to watch one way or another.
FTR versus Briscoes 3, double dog collar. And they tried to hide it from us. Now, they did everything they could. They waited till literally less than, what did we figure out, 66 hours before the match went in the ring to even announce it to begin with. Then they put it on the least watched pay-per-view that they will do all year because it's a Ring of Honor pay-per-view. Ring of Honor has no television. Some people are going to say it's been AEW television, it's been Ring of Honor TV, but in such a haphazard way. 3 o'clock in the afternoon on a Saturday. But by cracky, even though we said if Tony would have announced it in proper time, that we would have actually given him our money, instead we just cut to the meat of the matter. This pay-per-view was 4.5 hours long from the indication that I was given on what I watched, and it was a one-match show, let's face it. I mean, there were people on there that we like, but the matchmaking was so ridiculous, and they had to shove Useless and Garcia down our throat again. But this was the match, really, that sold the last Ring of Honor pay-per-view. Everybody said, okay, for $40 or whatever, we want to see this match.
The last 2 Ring of Honor pay-per-views.
The last 2 Ring of Honor pay-per-views. I forgot. Last year's Final Battle and then last year's whatever the fuck it was they were on.
No, I think Final Battle last year was when they first attacked the Briscoes, but then they had 2 other pay-per-view matches this year.
That's right. Nevertheless, the point is they have yet to have one on an AEW pay-per-view. They have yet to have and I'm calling bullshit at this point. I'm calling bullshit on their supposed reason that Mark and Jay Briscoe are not on AEW television. I think it has more to do with the jealous EVPs than with any executive. They've had convicted felons, bank robbers, people in and out of rehab on this program. And everybody's just fine. And if you want to talk about Mike Tyson was on the show, how many years was he in prison? But a mean tweet from 12 years ago. I think it's something else from, well, back when the Buckaroos were in Ring of Honor in 2011. We had the same issue, Delirious and I. How do you book these guys against any other tag team? Can't book them against the Briscoes. That looks ridiculous. Looks like the Briscoes should be arrested for abusing children. Can't book them against Haas and Benjamin. That'd be more ridiculous. What the fuck do you do when there are 2 children that are visually off-putting? And the only way that they ever got over the Briscoes in Ring of Honor was by, unfortunately, co-opting the whole company on this deliriousness, no pun intended, this delusional, elite, Bullet Club, we're all the next future of wrestling thing. And they got by with that just long enough to bilk a billionaire out of his money. But I digress. I'm officially calling bullshit that the best wrestlers and the best announcers that we see in the entire year of wrestling, none of them are featured, in some case, the Briscoes at all, in FTR's case prominently, in Ian and Caprice's case barely, featured on the main television programming. It's like who's the best player right now for your beloved New York Mets?
Depends on what you're looking at, but let's say Pete Alonso.
Okay, let's send Pete Alonso to fucking Toledo to bat for the Mud Hens, and we'll bring one of the AAA guys up and put him in an old Alonso spot. Does that make sense?
It wouldn't make sense, and of course, the Mud Hens are a part of a different farm system, but yeah.
Well, you get my drift. But nevertheless, so here we go. 3 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon on a Ring of Honor pay-per-view for a company that no longer exists, doesn't have a television program, but they're going to have the best match that they've had that's been on the air since the last time the Briscoes and FTR had a match. Again, the Briscoes have the best look of any tag team in wrestling. You instantly believe that they're who they're supposed to be. And they make an impression. And the Briscoes aren't spring chickens anymore. I'm trying to think, 20 years ago, one of them's closing in on 40 and the other one might be 40. But they sure don't move like it. And they look even better than they did 10 years ago. Because they look meaner and dirtier and nastier. And that's an example of a tag team having a gimmick instead of playing a part or being characters. Their gimmick is them turned up. And this match, if a lot of people are going, well, Cornette, they used chairs and tables and they had blood and a chain match and everything. If you're going to do this match, this is the way to do this match. If you're going to be wild, this is the place to do it. Both teams, not only in storyline, but in reality, have something to prove. Both teams they've had 2 matches, and both matches have been completely different. And now this is a stipulation match, and it's going to be completely different. And not only are they trying to follow it to prove something in storyline to each other that they're the baddest tag team, but they're trying to prove to everybody in their own company that they're the best. It's a follow this motherfuckers type of deal. Hey, they're saying the Midnight Express did the same thing with the Fantastics our last night in the Dallas Sportatorium. Wasn't even a TV taping, just for the people there, the goddamnedest match they ever had. People were fucking screaming, we leave, and it was like, follow that, motherfuckers, we're gone. You should have paid us. Well, they're doing the same thing. Follow this, motherfuckers. Oh, but we forgot. You can't, because none of you are as good as we are. And they're trying to make a point, and they made it. If you're going to have chairs and tables and furniture and blood, this is the kind of match to have it. These are the 2 kind of teams to do it. There's no trampoline bullshit, no holding hands and do-si-doing. It looked like a fight between 4 guys that didn't like each other with animosity and aggression. And can you imagine if it wasn't so overdone that every jack-off indie match has a table stunt, or chairs, or blood, or whatever the fuck, that when 2 professional teams with a reason for it that can execute it, when they actually do it, it would mean so much more, because every jackleg in town wasn't being allowed to do it. So it's context, presentation, and performance. And most people don't have it, but these guys did. And Ian and Caprice call it seriously. They're speaking to wrestling fans, but they're not being markish. They don't have the over-the-top tone or the ridiculous, incessant insistence on every Japanese move ever made being called like sockface. You understand them and you believe them. So they're not being ridiculous. FTR. They could have a wrestling match with rules and not bury the referee and do everything right. Or they can babyface and they can heel. And they can have a brawl. And it still looks good. And you still get into it. And it doesn't look hokey or phony. This is not 2 fat bald guys with fucking things dangling out of their ears, standing there letting each other bash them over the head with a fucking fluorescent light tube. It looks like a fight between 4 guys that chained 2 and 2 that don't like each other and didn't want to be there. Wanted to get finished with it and be done with the other guy. And I believe that's why the Buckaroos in their camp are so jealous of guys like this because they're not capable of doing this. They're not capable of looking like men in a fight. They're not capable of work good enough to make it believable that they would hurt anybody except their friends that flip and flop for them the same way. So, as far as a television product, besides this kind of match being hard to follow for the cameras, especially when there's two guys in one part of the building and two guys in the other part of the building, it's hard to follow on TV. It's better in the arena when you can see the whole scene of chaos. Otherwise than that, this was an example of what you can do when you take the business seriously, you're good at it, and you can project an aura that you are serious about what you're doing instead of just jacking around. And Moxley and Jericho could learn from all of these guys sleight of hand, I'll tell you that. It didn't get old. It wasn't like, oh my God, we're seeing this again and again and again, just repetition and blah. They exchanged advantages at different points, but it kept it fresh. And again, when Dax accidentally nailed Posey, the referee, Mike Posey, and busted him open, then not only people, but Caprice and Ian went to the golf commentary, the hush, like, oh shit, this is serious. Whereas Sockface would have been screaming, oh my God, he's bleeding. And they worked with the chains. The chains sometimes didn't work with them, but they worked the chain gimmick. And the chains were important parts of various things throughout the match.
Hey, I'm trying to think off the top of my head, how many times were you actually involved with a chain during a match?
Oh, I don't think the Midnight ever had one.
That's what I'm trying to think of. I can't think of a single example.
And the Gangstas, I booked one time, the Gangstas against Tracy Smothers and Tony Anthony, I believe it was. And they're hard because you have to keep going, but you can't step on the other guy's spots and et cetera, et cetera. But there haven't been that many double chain matches, so they didn't have, you can research the strap matches and the chain matches, the singles, Wahoo's strap matches or Malenko's chain matches or Ron Ray. Well, there's not a lot of Ron Wrights around on film, but you have to be really creative to do it in a tag team environment. And, especially at the point in time where, one guy needs help, but his partner can't get to him because the other guy's sitting down on the chain and he can't get to him, shit like that. And poor Dax tried to do that diving headbutt with the chain wrapped around his head at one point. He was bleeding so bad he couldn't get the chain to quit slipping off his head. You could see him say, fuck it. He just held it on and went with it anyway. Still looked good. But that's the thing. And all these guys are tough. But again, the Briscoes have been taking bumps like this for 20 years. They are the toughest guys in the business. I'm not talking about collegiate shooters. I'm talking about you apparently don't want to fuck with the Briscoes because they don't sell pain and injury very well. And there were few false finishes, but they got them when they did them. When Jay hit that J driller on Dax and got a 2 count, it was a huge pop. And they're selling the effects of what's going on. And Ian Riccaboni asked, what about these guys' wives and kids? I mean, that's old-fashioned wrestling commentary, not Hayabusa did this in the Tokyo Dome in 1993. It's these guys are married. They have kids that are going to be seeing this. What must be going through their minds? Everybody can relate to something like that. It's not fucking goofy and abstract. And Dax has an incredible pile driver, and he hit it on the chair on Jay, I think it was, for a 2 count, but he didn't get the full cover. And I could buy that. When he pile drove him, he just turned over and his legs were covering Jay because he was so spent. And the people start chanting, "This is awesome," and they were chanting, "This is wrestling." They know it when they see it. They just don't get to see it that often. And then the finish was simple, but it worked for this because everybody was so beaten down. Jay finally hits a superplex on Dax onto a bunch of chairs in the ring, but both of them sold. There wasn't a cover immediately. Mark was holding Cash out on the floor with the chain, and then finally Jay's able to cover, but enough time has expired. 1, 2, kick out, big pop. But now Jay's got Dax down, and he hog-tied him with the chain around his mouth and face and stretched him. And Dax didn't tap. The referee called it. He was out. He was defenseless. Boom, ding, 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 new champions. And people went crazy. And everybody, again, is talking about another match of the year candidate. You think? That's what we've been screaming. I've been screaming about the Briscoes for 10 fucking years. But anyway, all serious, no bullshit, looked like a grudge match. And people respond to that. And the blood fit, and even the weapons fit, because that's the place to do it. And they didn't bury the referee with all this stuff, because not only was it an anything goes, no DQ, but it wasn't lazy booking, not the way these teams did it. But they also had 2 referees, so when the one got knocked goofy and got busted open, Paul Turner could take over. It looked like they were trying to do something to control this as best as possible. Everybody did a good job on this thing. And that's why it's so criminal that the smallest audience gets to see this. And even if you say, okay, well, the Briscoes, because of this unnamed executive that's pissed off from 12 years ago, they can't be on TBS. Why can't FTR be on TBS? So we can see some of this shit with other teams in them. Why do we have to look at the goddamn Bermuda Triangle and the Cucamonga Kids 7 weeks in a row? Because of their egos, and they're jealous. This match makes people want to search out and find and pay $40 for a fucking pay-per-view. They don't give a shit about anything else on the card. But the matches they're presenting in their best of 7 series make hundreds of thousands of people turn it off, and it's free. Help me, Brian, to understand this.
Well, I don't think there's any understanding of the booking of FTR, and Tony can't really explain why they've been booked this way. There's no explanation for it, especially considering how in 2022 their popularity exploded, and they also had the best tag team matches anyone has seen in years. And it's not just the Briscoes. So there's no explanation for any of that.
FTR and Ozzy Oldham over there in England said people raved about it. FTR versus anybody, they go everywhere, they win everything everywhere else, and they have great matches. But the promotion they're signed to, they do pre-tapes with children. Oh, and then by the way, just for the finish of this, after this incredible match, to shoot an angle on a pay-per-view that a minute portion, less than probably a 10th of the audience for free television is going to see, after FTR puts the Briscoes over, then the Gun Boys come out and beat the shit out of them and cut a promo on them, and then the Briscoes chase them off. Talk about an extraneous angle that wasn't necessary and didn't need to be done. In that moment, especially. They can't help themselves.
I completely agree, to the point where I even forgot that happened, because there was no point in it happening there. I will disagree with you on one thing, and traditionally I've liked them. I didn't like the commentary, and I think Ian does a good job, but he's got to be careful with the fake-sounding announcer voice sometimes. Because he said, oh, what about their wives? It's one thing saying, oh my God, what about their wives? I'm thinking, oh my God, what about their wives? What about you? Like, you have to be careful with that. You know, I know he's a professional and he has a way of speaking, but sometimes, especially when it's a brutal match like this, I think it needs to sound a little more raw, a little less, not wrestling raw, but a little more raw as a broadcaster, a little less polished in those moments.
Well, but at the same time, they were probably trying to do the same thing that the guys in the match were trying to do. Show, hey, we're over here. We do a better job than everybody else, and we're on the C team. What about us? So there could have been an element of trying a little hard there also. But I like them.
And my biggest problem with the match was probably conceptually, and it took me a while to get into it. We can go over the fact that if you really think about it, despite the fact there's been no TV, no build-up, no programs, maybe 1 or 2 YouTube videos we saw of this program, there was room to do a lot because it's a 1-year program. They attacked the Briscoes a year ago at Final Battle. They close out, we would think, they close out the program, at least this version of it, a year later at Final Battle. A good open, a good end, great matches in the middle, just nothing to build it up special or do good promos or anything else.
And my God, as bad as they need people that can talk on that television show, and the Briscoes interviews are some of the best in the business too. They could light that fucking show up and give you something to look forward to.
I agree with you. But my problem was, I loved the first match. I loved the second match, 2 of my favorite matches of the year, easily. And the third match was great, but I said conceptually I had a problem with it. Why are they having a dog collar match?
Well, we don't know.
Did one of the wrestlers try to escape one of the previous matches? No. Traditionally when the dog collar is used, most people go right back to Piper and Greg Valentine in '83 in Mid-Atlantic.
But actually, they should go back to Dog and Hayes in 1980 because that's the gist of it, is that Dog was allegedly blind, but this way, Hayes couldn't get away from him. He couldn't get any farther than 10 feet away from Dog because they were going to be chained together. And that's so you're right. So Tony Khan set it up. It's Tony Khan's booking. The teams just took it and made something out of it. Would I have had a double dog collar match as the blow off to this, or as any part of this feud? Probably not, without doing something to set up the dog collar match. But we are working with the fact that Tony Khan's a mark and just writes down stipulations to matches without really knowing why they are supposed to come about or how they're supposed to be set up or whatever. They just say, oh, God, that'll be great. But he would put Bruiser Brody in a chain match, whatever. He swings the chains, we'll put him in a chain match, blah, blah, blah. But when the wrestlers involved can take something that doesn't really make sense and still make a masterpiece out of it and then do it in 3 different ways over the course of the year, I like that.
It was a brilliant and brutal dog collar match. My issue, why it took me a little bit to get into it, was there was no reason for these guys to immediately go out there and kill each other with the dog collars. There was no blood feud. No one had hurt anyone else's family members. No one had insulted anyone else's family members. It was
now they did a lot on the YouTube videos that we didn't get to see because they weren't on television.
Again, I thought it was a great, that's the dichotomy for me. It was a brilliant dog collar match, but it was hard for me to understand why. Why was there a dog collar match? Why were the Guns given the heads up before FTR that they could announce it by pulling the dog collars out of the stockings?
Well, remember we talked about that. Why did they give the graphics department the heads up before they told the people it was in the match they were going to be in the match? But we can't. Then all we'd be doing is tearing everything apart. If we tried to make Tony Khan's booking make sense, I'm just trying to appreciate the work of the boys.